Where are you all watching from today? Drop your city and state in the comments. I love seeing how far this community reaches. My name is not important. What matters is what happened to me 2 years ago. And why I'm only now able to talk about it without my hands shaking. I'm 31 years old. I work as a paralegal at a mid-size firm in Columbus, Ohio. I have a small apartment, a rescue cat named Biscuit. And until recently, I had a family I would have done absolutely anything for. I want you to hold on to that last part. My brother Daniel is 3 years older than me. Growing up, Daniel was the one who could do no wrong. He was the athlete, the charmer, the one my mother introduced at parties by listing his achievements before she even said his name. This is my son Daniel, state champion swimmer. Full scholarship to Ohio State. Graduated top of his class. I was just his sister. I was just there. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I've done a lot of therapy. I understand now that what my parents built in our house was not a family, it was a hierarchy. And Daniel sat at the top of it from the day he was born. My mother loved me. I believe that. But she loved Daniel the way you love something you built yourself. Something you point to and say, "Look what I made." I was just the other one. Daniel married his college girlfriend, Stephanie, 8 years ago. Stephanie is the kind of woman who smiles at you while she's deciding exactly what she can get from you. I tried to like her. I tried for years. But there is something behind her eyes that has never once been warm. And I am not the only person who has noticed it. My cousin Renee told me at the wedding that Stephanie reminded her of a real estate agent, always looking around a room to see what it's worth. I laughed at that then. I wish I had paid more attention. My father passed away 4 years ago. Heart attack. Very sudden. No warning. He and I had never been close. He followed my mother's lead in most things, including how much attention he paid me versus Daniel, but losing him cracked something open in my chest that I didn't expect. Grief is strange that way. You don't always grieve the relationship you had. Sometimes you grieve the one you always wanted and never got. After my father died, my mother started depending on Daniel for everything: financial decisions, home repairs, medical appointments. I offered to help. I asked repeatedly. I was told, gently and then less gently, that Daniel had it handled. I lived 40 minutes away. I offered to come every weekend. I was told not to go out of my way. I kept calling. I kept showing up on holidays. I kept being the one who remembered her doctor's name, her medication schedule, which grocery store she preferred, which brand of tea she had been drinking since 1987. Daniel remembered her as a concept. I knew her as a person. 2 years ago, my mother had a mild stroke. She recovered well. Her speech came back fully within a few weeks, and her mobility was not significantly affected. But the experience frightened her, and she started talking about her will. She had assets. Not enormous, but meaningful. The house she and my father had owned for 35 years in a quiet suburb outside Columbus. A savings account with a little over $90,000 that my father had built slowly over a working life. Some jewelry that had been in her family for 2 generations. She told me, in a phone call about 3 weeks after she came home from the hospital, that she wanted to split everything equally between Daniel and me. She said she had spoken to a lawyer and was updating her documents. She said she wanted both of us taken care of. She cried a little. I cried too. It felt like the first honest conversation we had ever had. That was a Tuesday in October. She passed away the following March. A second stroke. This one, severe. She was gone within 48 hours. I did not get to say goodbye. I drove to Daniel's house the evening after the funeral. We sat in his living room with Stephanie, perched on the arm of the couch beside him. And Daniel told me that there was something I needed to know about the will. He said our mother had changed it. He said she had updated her documents in January, 2 months after her first stroke, and that the new will left the house and the savings account entirely to him. He said she had left me her jewelry, which he estimated at a few $1,000s. Maybe. He said the lawyer had everything in order and that the process would move forward quickly. He said he was sorry. He did not look sorry. Stephanie looked at her phone while he talked. She did not look up once. I drove home in a kind of silence I had never experienced before. Not quiet, silent. Like the inside of something sealed. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in the days after that conversation. Because I think it matters. I did not feel only grief. I felt something harder and colder than grief. Something I eventually identified as the specific pain of being proven right about something you desperately hoped you were wrong about. I had always suspected, somewhere underneath everything, that I was less important to my family than Daniel was. And now I had proof. Not the proof of small moments and overlooked birthdays, actual, legal, documented proof. My mother had looked me in the eyes and told me she wanted to take care of me. And then, 2 months later, she had signed a document that did the opposite. Or someone wanted me to believe she had. I am a paralegal. I work with legal documents every day. I know what a valid will looks like. I know what the execution requirements are in the state of Ohio. I know that a will signed by a person with a recent significant neurological event can be contested on the grounds of testamentary capacity. I know all of this because it is my job. But I also knew something more specific than that. I knew my mother. I knew that she had cried on the phone with me in October and meant every word. I knew the way her voice sounded when she was being honest versus when she was managing a situation. I knew she had been frightened by the stroke in a way that made her want to make things right, not redistribute them. And I knew, with a certainty I could not yet prove, that the woman who signed that January document was not the same woman who had spoken to me in October. I asked Daniel for a copy of the updated will. He said the lawyer would handle distribution and I didn't need to worry about the details. I asked again. He said he would pass along my request. 3 weeks went by. Nothing. I called the lawyer directly. His name was on a document Stephanie had sent to our family group chat after my mother died, a brief note about estate proceedings with his firm's letterhead. I called the number. His assistant told me he could not discuss the matter with me, as I was not his client. I asked who his client was. She said she couldn't say. I thanked her and hung up. I called our family attorney, the one my parents had used for decades. A man named Gerald, who had known me since I was 7 years old. I explained the situation. He told me that if I had concerns about the validity of the updated will, I had the right to request a copy as a potential heir, and that if the document was being withheld, that itself was worth noting. I also called my mother's neurologist's office. I had been the one to accompany her to appointments since the first stroke. Daniel had been too busy. And Stephanie had offered once and then not followed through. The office knew me. I spoke to the nurse practitioner I had met 3 times in person. I explained that my mother had passed and that I was trying to understand the timeline of her recovery. I did not say why. Not yet. The nurse practitioner told me she could not share medical records without a formal request through proper channels. But she also said something that I wrote down word for word the moment I hung up. She said, I will tell you that we had some concerns about cognitive function at her January visit. January. The same month the new will was signed, I submitted a formal medical records request as part of an estate inquiry. I hired a probate attorney, not Gerald. Someone with specific experience in contested wills. Her name was Patricia, and she was exactly as sharp as I needed her to be. She filed for a copy of the updated will through proper legal channels. It arrived 10 days later. I read it at my kitchen table, with biscuits sitting on my feet. The document was dated January 17th. My mother's signature was at the bottom. I had seen my mother's signature thousands of times on birthday cards, on permission slips, on the Christmas checks she sent every year in the same green envelopes. The signature on that document was close. It was practiced. But the pressure was wrong. And there was a slight leftward drift that had not been in her handwriting before the stroke, and that I recognized from the documents I had watched her struggle to sign at the hospital in October. Patricia told me that signature concerns alone were not enough. We needed the medical records. They arrived 3 weeks later. Patricia reviewed them with a neurologist she worked with on cases like this. The assessment was careful and professional, and took 2 weeks. The conclusion was this in January: that my mother had demonstrated measurable cognitive impairment on standard assessment scales. The notes from the January visit documented confusion, short-term memory gaps, and difficulty with sequential reasoning. The examining physician had flagged concerns and recommended follow-up testing. That testing had never been scheduled. A woman with documented cognitive impairment in January had allegedly decided, in January, to cut her daughter entirely out of her estate. Patricia filed a formal contest. Daniel called me the night the filing was served. It was 9:30 on a Wednesday. And I was making dinner. And I watched his name appear on my phone screen, and I let it ring twice before I answered. He did not start with hello. He said, "What are you doing?" Not a question. A statement. The way someone talks when they've been caught doing something, and they're hoping if they act angry enough. You'll forget that. I said I was exercising my legal rights as an heir. He said our mother had made her decision freely, and I needed to respect that. I said that was what we were going to let a court determine, he said. And I remember this exactly. You always had to make everything about you. Even now. She's barely in the ground and you're doing this. I didn't say anything for a moment. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to be enough, all the holidays I had driven to, all the phone calls I had made, all the appointments I had sat through, all the ways I had shown up while being told. In 100 small and large ways. That showing up wasn't quite enough. I said, "I'll see you at the hearing." Daniel. I hung up. Stephanie texted me 20 minutes later. The message was long. It talked about how much stress Daniel was under, how much he had sacrificed to take care of our mother, how I had always been jealous of their relationship, how this was going to destroy the family, how I should be ashamed. There was a line in the middle of it that stopped me cold. She wrote, "Your mother knew exactly what she was doing when she updated that will. She told us specifically that she didn't feel you had earned it." I screenshotted that message. I sent it to Patricia that night, because here is the thing about what Stephanie wrote. If my mother's decision had been fully her own, if she had been of sound mind and clear intention, there would have been no reason for Stephanie to know the specific reasoning behind it. A conversation that private, that pointed, about which child had earned an inheritance, that is not the kind of thing a dying woman shares with her daughter-in-law. That is the kind of thing that gets said in a room where someone is being coached on what to say. Patricia thought so too. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a courthouse in Columbus that I had parked outside of 100 times on my way to work without ever imagining I would sit inside it across from my brother. I did not sleep the night before. I lay in my bed with biscuit on my chest, and I thought about my mother in October, crying on the phone, telling me she wanted to take care of me. I thought about whether she had known. At the end, what was happening around her? Whether she had been frightened. Whether she had been alone in a way that I, who had tried so hard not to let her be alone, had somehow failed to prevent. I am not going to pretend the hearing was dramatic in the way things are on television. It was quiet and procedural, and very long. Patricia presented the medical records. The neurologist she worked with provided a written assessment. The timeline was laid out: the October conversation, the January signing, the documented cognitive decline in between. Daniel's lawyer argued that the January assessment was preliminary and inconclusive, and that my mother had been lucid and intentional at the time of signing. He presented a statement from the lawyer who had drafted the new will, the one whose assistant had told me he couldn't discuss the matter with me, saying that my mother had appeared oriented and purposeful at the appointment. Patricia asked, in cross, whether that lawyer had been informed of the January neurological assessment before the signing. He had not. She asked whether standard practice would include verifying capacity documentation for a client with a recent neurological event. There was a pause before the answer. She asked whether the lawyer had any prior relationship with Daniel or Stephanie Mercer. He acknowledged that Stephanie had referred 2 previous clients to his firm. The judge asked several questions. He was methodical and gave nothing away. We received the ruling 4 weeks later. The January will was found to be invalid due to insufficient evidence of testamentary capacity at the time of execution. The prior will, the one my mother had told me about in October, the one that split everything equally, was reinstated as the governing document. I sat in Patricia's office and read the ruling twice. Then I put it down on her desk and looked out the window at the parking lot for a long moment. Patricia said, "You okay?" I said. "I think so. I have not spoken to Daniel since the hearing. I have not responded to Stephanie's messages, which continued for several weeks after the ruling, and which I will not describe here because they do not deserve the space. I have blocked them both on every platform and in my phone. I have informed the extended family members who asked that I have made my decision and that it is not up for discussion. My cousin Renee, the one who made the real estate agent comment at Daniel's wedding, called me the week after the ruling. She said she had always thought something was off. She said she was sorry it took this long for someone to say it out loud. We had dinner last month for the first time in years and talked for 4 hours, and it was one of the better evenings I can remember. The house is being handled through the estate. The savings account has been divided. I received my half of my mother's jewelry. And I received the things she actually intended for me to have. But I want to tell you something that matters more to me than any of that. On the last page of my mother's original, will, the one from years before the stroke, the one that predated all of this, there was a personal note she had asked the attorney to include. It was not legally binding. It was just something she wanted to say. She wrote that she was proud of both her children. She wrote that she hoped they would take care of each other. She wrote that she wanted them to remember that family was the thing worth protecting above everything else. I think about that note a lot. I think about what she meant by it and whether she knew, somewhere underneath the love she had for Daniel, that things were not right. I think about whether she would have made different choices if she had understood what Stephanie was. I think about the version of my family that never got to exist, and then I close the folder, and I go feed Biscuit, and I make myself some coffee, and I sit in my apartment in Columbus, Ohio, and I remind myself that I did not let it stand. I found the records. I hired Patricia. I sat across from my brother in a courthouse, and I let the evidence speak. I did not yell. I did not threaten. I did not do any of the things I imagined doing in the darkest parts of those sleepless nights. I just did the work, carefully and completely, and without apology. Because my mother told me in October that she wanted to take care of me, and I believed her. And I was right to believe her. And when Daniel's lawyer handed him that ruling across the conference table, and Daniel finally looked up and found my eyes across the room, I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. He already knew what he had tried to do. He already knew I had found it. And he already knew from the look I gave him, steady and quiet and finished, that I was done. Some doors don't need to be slammed. You just close them, gently, and you walk away. That's exactly what I did. If you've been through something like this, if someone in your family has tried to take something from you, whether it's money or an inheritance, or just the simple truth of what you deserve, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story helped you feel a little less alone in whatever you're carrying, That's enough for me. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.